beginning of worship, but I kind of thought I would just give you an introduction to it. I use them as I began a retreat to help people settle into the space, get your body settled into your space and your mind settled into the space. The one I'm doing now works best if I do the talking and you just do the motion. So if you could stand if you're able. And I'd like you to receive from the heavens what the heavens have for you. Receive from the world what the world has for you. And receive from the earth what the earth has for you. Now give back to the heavens praise and glory and thanksgiving. Give back to the world. What of your talents are you to give to the world? And giving back to the earth, replenishing the earth and the ground. Amen.
Please be seated. Just scoping things out to see if we have children today for the children's message. Anybody in the nursery? We don't have Emily today. She's on a road trip with some of her College of Wooster friends she went to school with, and they're in Montana. So hopefully hear a sermon on Montana when she gets down. So today is the Sunday before Pentecost, and some of you may know that the Ascension Day is a huge holiday among the Amish, and that's their day of the year, and that happened on Thursday. There's this kind of timeline of the resurrection of Jesus, where he is appearing to people for 40 days, actually, after the resurrection, and inspiring them and calling them again. And then in 50 days, in 40 days, which was last Thursday, the 28th, I think, of May, it's actually always the Thursday before Pentecost Sunday, and there are 10 days in there. And so that's the time that Jesus ascended into heaven on Ascension Day. And the reason why that's important is because, especially for the Amish, that now Jesus is in heaven to watch over them. Jesus is in heaven to be an intercessor. So we can pray to Jesus. Jesus helps us out. You might remember when Stephen was stoned, he looked up to heaven and he saw Jesus standing on the right hand of God the Father Almighty. And presumably that was because he was going to receive Stephen's soul when he came forward. May 26th, Larry's got the calendar down there. Thanks, Larry. May 26th for the Ascension Day. Thanks, Larry. So how many people celebrated Ascension Day? Okay, there you go. So, yeah, see, we were at the park for Ascension Day, and we had some music and kind of hung out together for a while, just before the storm came. So we were all right. But think about that. All of our traditions are a little bit different, but we don't really think sometimes about Jesus sitting on the right hand of God the Father Almighty. And so today is a day for us to consider our callings and to consider when the story today is a story of the disciples replacing Judas as one of the 12. And so it's a kind of a story about being called or feeling of being called. So think about in the days ahead how you feel God is calling you.
The first reading comes from Acts 1:21-26. Thus one of the men who have accompanied us during all the time that they were associated with us, beginning from his baptism by John until the day he was taken up from us. One of these must become a witness of his resurrection together with us. So they proposed two candidates, Joseph called Barsabbas, also called Justus, and Matthias. Then they prayed, Lord, you know the hearts of all. Show us which one of these two you have chosen to assume the task of this service and apostleship from which Judas turned aside to go to his own place. Then they cast lots for them, and the one chosen was Matthias. So he was counted with the 11 apostles. The second reading is from John 17, 20 to 26. Your part is the bold print. I am not praying only on their behalf, but also on behalf of those who believe in me through their testimony. That they may all be one. Just as you, Father, are in me and I am in you, I pray that they will be in us, so that the world will believe that you sent me. The glory you gave to me I have given to them, that they may be one, just as we are one. I in them, and you in me.
That they may be completely one.
So that the world will know that you sent me,
and you have loved them just as you have loved me.
Here ends the reading.
Today we dwell on how people change. And I want to begin with a brief story about why and how we begin to change. When I was in Algeria, we had a huge parking lot, and so often people would, drive back in it and drive around. And one day I looked out and I saw a man with a helmet on, and he was riding a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. And so I went out to talk to him, and he took off the helmet. And I realized it was a pastor of a larger church in town, and he had cones set up. And as he came toward me, he was like wobbling. You know how somebody kind of wobbles on a motorcycle sometimes? And it was my friend Dennis. And I said, what's going on, man? And he said, well, I keep failing my test for driving a motorcycle. And I turned 55. And I decided that it was time for me to get something I always wanted in life, a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Now, this was a guy who always wore a collar, He always was dressed extremely well. Now he wants to go the other way, see? He wants to be bold. And so I told him, well, I kind of take comfort in the fact that somewhere there's some guy that turned 55 and he sold his Harley-Davidson and he went to seminary. So, all these kinds of things can make us think differently about the world. So think about what caused the changes in your life. What caused you to change course in some place? We have, New Year's Eve as an opportunity to use it as a marker, to set it down and say, now I'm going to change. We all need those markers in our life. We usually have to do the calendar or something to that. But have you ever had anyone ask you, what is God calling you to do? In former days, that was the question. As a member of the church, they would say, what is God calling you to do? It was the most important question that you could ever ask. And today we have a story about accepting the challenge to step up. A story about hearing the call. Now, there are many fine adventures that have happened for people here at Trinity. when we begin the announcement, we need someone to ... And the book of Acts gives us a very real picture of very real people. People like you, whom God is preparing to be a witness in some way, to love and unity. And the point of the story is that it's being left in God's hands. And a lot of times we think, well, I've done all I can. It's in God's hands. And it's easy to turn to God in ways like that and believe God's going to do everything without our help. But we ought to think, well, it's all in God's hands, so I'll do all I can. It's a readiness. I've really been fortunate to be able to influence many College of Wooster students as they've come through the institution, many different ways. Mexico trips, been asked a couple of times to work with the incoming group on orientation. I co-taught a class with a couple of professors. I had a real opportunity to let them know the real life challenges that people have and to present before them opportunities for significance in their life. And I really appreciate that part of being so close to the College of Wooster. And I always say to them that there are some great quotes about how you should approach college and how you should move into that. And I like two quotes, and I want to throw them out for you to think about. First is Martin Luther King's great quote. Life's most urgent and persistent question is, what are you doing for others? Now, when I was in middle school, my parents religiously went to the library every week. So it was a good opportunity for me to get a bunch of books and, read a wide variety of things. And that was a good thing. And one day when I was there, it just happened that I picked up a book from Albert Schweitzer. And it was the book Reverence for Life. I'd recommend that book to everyone because he left a lot of things in Europe to go to Africa and serve there. But I really like his quote, and sometimes I repeat it for those groups when I talk to them. Albert Schweitzer had this great quote: I don't know what your destiny will be, but there is one thing that I know. The only ones among you that will be really happy are those who have sought and found how to serve. That's a great quote. College of Wooster students graduated this last week, and they all are going out into the world, and they're all going to be in positions and communities where they can make a difference, where they can open their eyes to see a different part of life than what they normally have been accustomed to. They have the power to make a difference. So the classic focus of this is that you move from being a disciple, where you're learning, to an apostle, where you teach. You get what you give. You reap what you sow. And it has to be something that you absolutely believe in. And that's the way the Spirit moves. It's never in the numbers. It's always where 2 or 3 are gathered. It's always the happenstance of picking up a book in a library. It's someone saying something to you in a certain way. It's somebody that you see doing something that you find admirable. It didn't start big. Jesus started with 12. But it was always about the heart and the soul. And every church has its own heart and soul. So in the book of Acts, they have to replace Judas. And the church is this community of people, this larger community. There weren't just, there was kind of a sequence of the 3, Peter, James, and John, inner core that Jesus took aside every once in a while and tutored. And then there were the 12, and then there were the 72 that were sent out into all the world. There was this larger group of disciples that followed Jesus. So it wasn't just 12, but the 12 leadership group. And it was about the Spirit moving among them. And the church became a community of people who have an eye and an ear for what God is doing in the world. Ascension Day, Pentecost Sunday. I'm reading a really great book by Dan Pink. It's called Drive. Any of you know Dan Pink? He was a speechwriter for President Gore, or not, I don't know, what did I say, President Gore? When Gore ran for president, I should say, the turning point of the century, right? But he has this perspective on business, and I like it because it goes along with what we ought to be doing in the church. And so he was talking to a whole bunch of business owners about community service and how the employees serve their customers. And they were complaining because they were always getting it wrong and telling people the wrong thing about the information. And they weren't really motivated. And so his suggestion was that people need, above everything else, a sense of belonging, a sense of having their own autonomy in the business. And so he said, why don't you tell your service people, do whatever you think is right when you're serving the customer. You know how it is when you call in, you try to get customer service on the line. It's pretty tough sometimes. But you turn that over to the individual to be their own genuine self, to use their own skills and abilities in a certain way that they know how to do it. And I think that's what Jesus did to us, right? That's what Jesus did to me. Do whatever you think is right when serving a customer, as long as the goal is love and unity. All you have to do is give them the basics. So today, on Ascension Day and heading into Pentecost, this is a day when we're authorizing you to pick up your ministry. We're authorizing you to go out into the world and wherever you can, form unity. Wherever you can, spread love. And do it in your own way. Do it in a way that seems best to your soul. Because service needs to be in your heart and your soul. There has to be a reason why you're doing it. And it will never be because of an obligation. It will never be simply for the benefits that you receive from that service. That's one of the problems we have today. We don't have intrinsic value in work. Jesus said, do what you think is right. Because service needs to be in your heart. One way that you can get at that is you can ask yourself, what makes you come alive? What do you get excited about? My friend was excited about Harley Davidson. What are you excited about? I've said it before, and I need to say it again. This is one of these things that I learned about speaking is you have to use repetition, right? Creating a caring community. How many times have you heard me say that? But that's not what I'm going to say today. This is the third time I've said it. That the Church of Jesus Christ, during his days on earth, was not about sitting in a pew on Sunday morning. The life of Jesus Christ was about walking around in the world to places that nobody else would go. Think about the lineup of stories about Jesus and the disciples. They almost want to quit around every corner because they say, Jesus, what are you doing here? But it was looking at the side of the road and finding people in need. It was about the transformation of the world. And so also, you are disciples here, but you're apostles when you go out there. You are love there. You are the person that will create unity there. So for the church, we have all these goals. And one of the goals in our mission group is to engage as many people as we possibly can in hands-on service. Because by and large, that is the best way to grow spiritually. Because you see and you know the need, and you feel good because you've met the need of another human being. And you've done something that will have ripple effects for a long time. Having a breakfast program is a wonderful opportunity to introduce people to that. But we've gone to Tijuana. How many of you here have gone to Tijuana, Mexico trip? A number of people. How many of you people have been to Pine Ridge, South Dakota? How many of you work for Habitat for Humanity? Build a house. Rich raises his hand every time. So. How many of you have been hospice volunteers? How many of you gone on any kind of a mission trip with us? You three. And really a good proportion of our members here have been on these trips. And that's why they sit here on Sunday, to be ready for Monday. We've sent so many people in ministry from this place just in the last 15 years. Lori Tisher, Gary Friend, Nancy Lucian, Leela Gendro, Emily Howard. They all were on that pathway. They all heard a call, but you know what? They got channeled through whatever it is in life. Channeled in this ministry, ordained ministry. And they didn't cast dice to get there either. This is the mission that Jesus gave us. And it doesn't matter who gets credit for it. Because the lot might fall on you. You might pick up a book and read it and say, I have to do something about this. And I hope that this scripture makes you wonder about all the kinds of things that God is, maybe silently, preparing you to do. God is preparing you for something. And it's not a matter of how you get, it's a matter of how we give. It's not a matter of what you are recognized for. It's a matter of what you recognize in the world. Joseph Campbell said it about the same way. He just told people to follow their bliss. I have a special benediction at the end of the service today. It's Isaiah 58. I think a lot of people don't realize all this stuff is in the Bible. And when we go through it, you'll see what I mean. But kind of as homework, you might take that home and read through it, because that was Isaiah's vision of what needs to happen in the world and his calling. And he was asking, do you want to work on this important mission that God wants for the world, that God needs for the world? You get what you give. Called and chosen. Another thing that strikes us a little bit odd about this whole calling of Matthias' story is that we don't cast lots to decide who's going to read Scripture for the day. So it's kind of like they're saying, okay guys, we got to ordain somebody. Let's roll the dice. Let's flip a coin. Let's have a short straw draw. But the apostles were really following something that happens all the time in the Bible. It's an ancient tradition of casting lots. So my favorite example is in 1 Chronicles, the time in there of the building up of Israel. And they used lots all the time to decide who did what kind of a service. There were lots drawn in the temple for someone to be the musician that day. How would that be, Suzanne? If we would have people come in the door and then you could just have these straws and just hide them in your hand. And whichever one of you got the short straw, you'd be the musician for the day. That sounds good, doesn't it? Man, that sounds like fun. That does sound like fun to me, actually, when I say that. It's like fun. Then there were the gatekeepers. You know, you see a gatekeeper gatekeeper for the day. You would be the person who washed the floors in the temple. And they did all that so people wouldn't have a big ego and that they would be willing to do menial things, knowing that even doing menial things contributes to the common good. And it's all the same. It's all done out of love and unity. It's all done for the sake of the people of God. But they really did that. So I was always amazed. I had a good rabbi friend when I was in Springfield, Illinois, Rabbi Datz, and D-A-T-Z. And he drove his car around, and he had a license plate, specialty license plate, that had Datz OK. And he was a great guy, had a sense of humor. We would do a couple of pulpit exchanges through the year. It was a lot of fun. I would go to the temple on Friday night. He would come to First Congregational on Sunday morning. And I was always amazed because he would stand up during the service and he would just pick people out of the crowd to say, would you read the scripture today? Or would you read this prayer today? And I thought, man, what would happen if I did that where I went? What kind of response would I get to that? That's what he did. I said, wow. Did the Matthias want to go? What do you think? Was he hoping that his straw got pulled? The only thing is a willing heart, right? What do you think about justice? He was the guy that lost. Do you think he was relieved? Or do you think he tried to compensate by going out and doing his own thing? He read Albert Schweitzer, right? He went out, he knew that stuff. My imagination, he went and did it anyway, even if he wasn't authorized. That's what a lot of people do. Do we keep the faith, even in discouragement? What kind of status do you have? That happens to me a lot of times at community gatherings in the square. I'll be standing there and I'll say, hey, Kevin, come up here. Oh, man. So I learned to be prepared. I learned to always have a piece of paper in my pocket with a prayer on it, or some kind of a saying, so that I'm ready. And that's preparedness. And you know what? I always know that it's going to be okay if I stick to unity and love. And that's all Jesus really asked of those disciples around that table. Worship is the work of the people. Engagement opens you up and helps you find your interests. Things that you never would imagine would happen. And all we have to do is ask God for love and unity. So the Bible gives us this very real picture of people. These are real people. They're people like you. And that there is a purpose that God leads you here. There was a purpose that all those people who ended up in the ministry stream came here. There was a reason. Something happened. In John 17, Jesus looked around at the disciples at the table that day. On the day before he died, he knew he only had one chance. One chance to inspire those disciples and give them the message and the heart of the message. And it was a simple message, and we find it in John 17 today. Jesus prayed that they may be one, and that they might experience the love of God that he experienced. Now, most of you know that that's the motto of the United Church of Christ. And in fact, I've got it in a little logo on the top of the first page, that they may all be one. Light to see. One of the best definitions of the church that I've heard is making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And the point of this story is that the book of Acts gives us this picture of people like you, whom God is preparing to go out into the world and to spread love and unity. The point of our story is that God leaves it in our hands. And somehow or other, however we want to look at the way you pick up a book and it changed your life. Somehow I picked up a book, Reverence of Life, when I was in middle school, and I read it. Is God's hand in that? Drawing a line, calling you here for some unknown reason? All I can say is what Elder Schweitzer said. I don't know what your destiny will be, but what I do know is that the only ones among you who will ever be happy are those who have sought and found how to serve.